I'm Josh, just say I'm Josh, and
And hi, I'm Gareth Humphreys. We're both founders of Dead Northern, which no matter how many times you say it, always sounds odd coming from a southern accent. We're a horror and fantasy film festival based in North Yorkshire. Maya's kindly invited us to come and have a chat with you this evening.
cool, yeah. So I guess I'll start with the brief history of kind of how we got to where we are. So three founders of Dead Northern, myself, Gareth, and Rick, who couldn't be here tonight. So my background's in accounting. I've been an accountant for 10 years, running various kind of hospitality kind of landscapes. Gareth is our creative director, and Rick is our operations director. And his kind of background is he runs an audiovisual company. So he kind of has the background of running the technical element of the events. Um, as a team, we've been running large hospitality events maybe for the last couple of years, several years, including the Harrogate Charity Beer Festival, which I kind of chaired in 2019. Rick organising the audiovisual side and the live entertainment, and Gareth doing the creative design and the marketing for the festival. And it was after the closing of that 2019 festival. We were sat in a pub to celebrate and very pleased with ourselves, having raised a load of money for charity. And we sort of sat around the table and wanted to work together again and discuss maybe a commercial project that we could work on together ourselves. And there really wasn't any debate about it, I don't think. Me and Gareth were massive genre fans. Rick was a massive genre fan. And we were all in agreement we had to do a horror film festival.
Yeah. Well, the first hurdle was coming up with an original take on a film festival. There's several well-established horror and fantasy film festivals in the UK right now. Fright Fest in London probably being the biggest, up north with Grimfest in Manchester, and just down the road from us in Harrogate, we've got Celluloid Screams in Sheffield. That's just to name a few. There's plenty more dotted around the country. But we wanted to make sure that we weren't just another carbon copy of these already fantastic events. I've been a regular goer of Fright Fest for uh, since it started and I love it. That's one of the reasons why I got into horror. Now, given our own experiences of running festivals with live entertainment, food, drink, as well as seeing people seating people for screenings, normally sport rather than film, the idea was born to create a film festival that focused on the social side of the festival as much as the films, with our emphasis being putting pop-up cinemas anywhere that we wanted to. With Rick owning an AV company, we had access to a huge amount of technology, and our know-how of how to put on an event meant that we could literally just point at a place and decide that's where we wanted to put a festival on. So we sat down that day in the pub, decided to get things going. So from mid-March to late summer of 2019, for entirely research purposes, and I emphasize entirely on research and development purposes, we held all of our meetings in pubs and bars and other unique venues, finding inspiration from some of Yorkshire's most fantastic locations.
Yeah, and our first event was kind of under the banner of Harrogate Horror Film Festival. We didn't want to set our sights too high at the time, kind of getting started, and it wasn't until January 2020 that we took the name Dead Northern. Our venue for the 2019 fest was in a stunning 19th century church in the centre of Harrogate over Halloween. Over the course of the weekend, we screened various kind of classic and modern horror movies, held our first 80s horror prom, a Halloween party with a 3-course meal, live acoustic versions of classic horror movie scores. There was just loads of entertainment going on throughout the weekend, so for sort of all kind of age groups. And it was an incredible venue for our first event, visually and acoustically, but the religious nature of the building did mean that we had to adapt our vision slightly to kind of specific guidelines. And this wouldn't be obviously the first time that happened over the next couple of years. And yeah, so you'll be seeing a couple of photos from the event at the moment. From here, we built our following locally and rebranded as Dead Northern. And we started to run some smaller pop-up screenings at various locations around Harrogate and sort of Yorkshire over the Christmas holiday. And our sort of major event coming into 2020, far more terrifying than Halloween for some people, Valentine's Day. So again, this was kind of a 3-course meal format with the screening of Hitchcock classic Psycho, dark and twisted horror classic. The screening was followed by live entertainment with burlesque dancing, table mentalism from an illusionist, and it was all hosted in one of our kind of most prestigious craft breweries in Harrogate. So you've seen a couple of photos from that now. And yeah.
Right, so the reason that we've given you such a detailed account of what we do is to give you a better idea of why the next event affected us so much. So just as we were establishing Dead Northern and our live events, COVID. The virus has disrupted all of our lives, no doubt, but for Dead Northern, a fledgling business, its entire focus is based on cinema, hospitality, and creating events that are based on human interaction. We're especially hard hit. The first lockdown of 2020 wiped out our entire spring and summer plans, and we had some amazing stuff. Imagine the Blair Witch Project in the woods, for one example. But given the uncertainty of how the rest of the year was going to pan out, we decided to press ahead with our main event. It's held at the end of October, albeit with changes from our original vision. In some respects, being a newer event kind of helped. It allowed us to adapt more quickly and change our ideas, which was crucial over the year as the regulations and rules changed so dramatically. Now, given that our USP is to put the festival into the film festival, an all digital festival wasn't really an option. And the fact that the established festivals already had this covered and we just couldn't compete. With online festivals being oversaturated in 2020, we really wanted to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the market.
Yeah, so this was, of course, hard to plan for in COVID in 2020, being required to adapt to the festival to every eventuality. We had a lockdown, we had a national tier system, a national regulation system. We had the tier system that came in locally later on. So the first challenge was finding a suitable venue, which had to be much larger than planned to comply with social distancing. So we settled on a venue we'd use for the beer festival, which would usually hold around 1,500 people, not in non-COVID times. And social distancing was a big factor. So we opted, being in tier 2, to go for sofas spread out 2 meters apart, socially distanced in a huge ballroom in the hotel, which meant we could still kind of reach a capacity of about 120 people in the cinema. And that came with table service, cleaning in between the film screenings, and abiding to kind of local and national rules, as well as kind of getting some pretty hefty documents signed off by our local council. Staffing and security obviously was a bigger cost for us as well in the year, in terms of just safe operation and kind of reminding everyone of the guidelines that were changing every 5 minutes. And yeah, so we took a pretty harsh approach on the ticketing system, in that we just decided to go ahead of the rules. We limited groups to 4 people, and they had to be all from the same household. That was kind of ahead of the tier 2 regulations at the time. But we just felt we wanted to be extra cautious, extra safe, and you make everyone feel safe as well at the event.
The film lineup was also affected. COVID meant less competition. Indie filmmakers were dominating in 2020 as all the big blockbuster movies were delayed, which gave us access to a pool of movies that we may not have had at any other times. And it was also great for horror in general, because it meant that movies that would normally have been sidelined for your big blockbusters, or even the smaller films, used, these things. Amazon, for example, went through and just picked up all of these movies, with everybody sat at home just having not a lot else to do other than watch films, and this huge back catalogue of independent horror, as well as other movies, obviously. There was a great pick for us to go through, but because we had to focus on a more local audience, we decided that, and Harrogate not being particularly renowned as a horror institute, we needed to sort of be a bit more commercially viable. So we showed some horror classics such as Dawn of the Dead and Poltergeist, which were really quite popular. But for the new release, we managed to get Host, the biggest horror film of 2020. I'm not sure if any of you've seen it, but it's a Zoom-based found footage movie. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a runtime of about 50 minutes. It's well worth watching, especially looking back at the time that we've all spent with Zoom meetings. Another big movie that we had, or big independent movie we had, was 10 Minutes to Midnight. It's an indie vampire horror movie with Scream Queen Caroline Williams, who you may know from some of the original classics such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We also premiered the 80s horror doc In Search of Darkness, which is on Shudder at the moment. It's been a huge success. Josh will talk about that in a bit as well. We've also conducted our interviews with filmmakers as pre-recorded. We would have loved to have had people there, but the inability to travel meant that we couldn't have any live Q&As or anything at the festivals. But by that point, everybody was already used to Zoom.
Yeah, so our original vision for the Halloween event was to provide quite a social weekend for our kind of pass holders with a very personal film experience, and we still managed to deliver that on some fronts. I think they all got their own sofa or large chair. They had table service with food and drink and kind of themed cocktails. They had the big large screen and the cinema experience, which was really great in a unique venue. And then there's the story of trying to source those 40 sofas from somewhere, which was quite a task, but that's a story for another time. So moving on to 2021 and coming out of COVID, hopefully, we thought we'd do a film festival with no films. Due to the popularity and sheer amount of films we had to choose from, we had to decide we wanted to decide the 2021 festival would be in an actual cinema, so slightly different from our usual USP. So we're moving to a big venue in a Yorkshire location, which we probably can't disclose at the moment. Along with a couple of pop-up things around the city that we're moving to. Although we can't go into much detail yet, I think it's going to be a really big one. But we had this idea of how we could differentiate from the online festivals going ahead at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So originally we didn't want to host an online festival, as we mentioned before. The other festivals have had this covered. There was no scope for us to add the community festival part that's integral to what we do. We very much like to play our own game when it comes to creating events and do things as and when it suits us. So the only logical way to compete with the beggar festivals was to do something entirely different. Something that as far as we're aware, no other film festival has ever done. We decided that we're going to host a film festival without any films. So instead, we're planning on telling the story from the backside of the silver screen, which will be named Dead Northern, the backside of the silver screen. With interviews of professionals from each sector of the industry, allowing them to give their story, their experiences, and pass on valuable knowledge. The target audience for this event is students and young filmmakers, but it'll be an amazing insight for anyone that's into the horror movies or even film on a whole, because of the group of people that we've been interviewing.
Yeah, so it's going to be a free event in the kind of run up to our physical event in October. And there's going to be interviews shown online, sort of released over a couple of weeks to kind of spread the interviews out. So we've had some amazing guests so far that we've kind of pre-recorded for that, which we've got director Uwe Boll, who will be speaking to us about kind of getting funding in the film industry in the kind of COVID era and dealing with critics, because he is sort of known as the most hated man in Hollywood, I think, was the title. Yep. Robin Block, who's founder of Creator VC, and he'll be chatting to us about his success in the physical distribution market. So he is the founder of Creator VC, who made In Search of Darkness, the 80s horror documentary that's on Shudder at the moment and has been incredibly successful. I think it's sold over, 200,000 physical copies of the first documentary. So it's kind of really kind of bucking the trend of the market of the decline in physical sales. Gareth Humphreys, the illustrator, who's done some of the most iconic 80s film and record cover art, I would say. He's done the Evil Dead poster, amongst others, which you might have seen. Ian Rattray, who founded Fright Fest, which is kind of the biggest genre horror festival in the UK, maybe one of the biggest in the world. And he'll be talking to us about the history of the film festival and its kind of place going forward in kind of post-COVID times. Alan Jones, who's an author and a movie critic. I think, that was a particularly fun interview. He's sort of, I think Mark Commode had said that he was one of the biggest kind of teachers growing up and becoming a movie critic. And many more kind of planned and recorded over the next couple of months and before it all goes live. So yeah, more industry-driven festival definitely seemed to be a bit of a gap in the market, we thought, for what could be a brilliant resource for kind of aspiring filmmakers and people who are just interested in the film industry.
Yeah, definitely, and an opportunity to find our place and sort of cement who we are as someone, as an organisation, that when everybody else is going left, we're going to go right, and just focus on doing almost the polar opposite of what other people are doing. Just ultimately because we can and we want to. That's kind of part of our ethos behind the scenes, isn't it? That,
Yeah, absolutely.
we don't just do things for a commercial reason. We'll sit around and just say, hey, this sounds like a really cool idea. How can we make that happen? And that's how we've got to this point here now. Yeah, so just sort of jumping on from there is like to talk about the future of cinema. We're obviously in a very strange time now. Cinema and the hospitality industry's been hit particularly hard, and with COVID and moving out of COVID, is going to have to change. There's major threats to the industry at the moment. Blockbuster releases via pay on demand is one of the biggest threats to the cinema. With easy access to large screens and quality audio equipment at home, it's hard to convince people that £15 for a new release and the comfort of your home, and you've had a drink and you want to run to the loo and pause it, versus what can easily be £100 for a family trip to the cinema. That's going to be a big problem going forward. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out going into the future, whether the big studios continue to push their demand for video on demand for their big releases, or whether they actually come back to the cinema. The figures are there, the numbers, the money's obviously being made. Some of these films have been huge successes with video on demand, and I can't imagine that the big production companies are going to want to change their minds about whether putting these out for people at home. There's obviously another chance of a wave of COVID, another lockdown. That's going to devastate an industry that's already very hard hit, financially. Will many of these cinemas, even the big ones, be able to take another financial hit like that, another close down? And for us, we're looking at this, that cinema is going to, in some respects, need to bring more value to get people out to the cinemas. And that's where, in some respects, I think we've been quite lucky with our idea of bringing the festival to the cinema and taking and adding new things, and adding themed events as part of the showing of a movie.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, it sounds all a bit kind of doom and gloom when you when you put it like that, but there is there's a lot of positive kind of news coming out of the industry, which is that there was a great kind of statistic that came out in terms of what were people most looking forward to coming out of lockdown, and that was going back to the cinema. There's been some brilliant kind of blockbuster hits come straight out of the gate, which has been like this weekend we've had A Quiet Place Part 2, which has been a really big success in terms of blockbuster kind of numbers, and the audience is definitely responding to being given way more than just the movie. So with the success of organizations like Secret Cinema, who have just moved to the US based on the success over here, film lovers want to meet the filmmakers. They want to be caught up in the whole world of the film. And if you're into film, then you don't just want to go, pay £20 for a cinema ticket and buy some expensive popcorn. You want a whole night out, at least, at the very best. But yeah, there are some huge pluses which you just cannot create at home, which are an unparalleled audiovisual experience. Few people have access to cinema quality quite as good as what you can get out there, and it's a proper event. People are eager to start going out there and doing stuff again. People may be more cautious because of COVID, but the kind of demand is certainly there, or we've certainly seen that locally. And
definitely, and it's a cultural thing. Cinema, it's got its place beyond film. It's a place people go on first dates. It's a place for family outings, pizza afterwards. It's a bonding place. It's an evening with friends, or as we've spoken to many of the people that we've interviewed, all of them have said one of the first things they're going to do is go to the cinema on their own. It's a place to watch a movie and just completely turn off. It's a place of clarity. All of these things, that doesn't matter how good your cinema setup at home is, and you know, you can buy some really good kit. It's just not the same. It's not got that cultural element, and that cultural element has been there for since the invention of cinema ultimately.
Yeah.
And you know, there's potential chance that the new releases, even maybe it's just a few weeks, but they probably will still go to the cinema first. So
yeah, I mean, there's two things that I love about the cinema. I think it's no phones,
yeah,
which allows you to properly actually look at a piece of cinema without being at home where you've got phone distractions, you've got
yeah.
not the right
Who
atmosphere and
is
all the
that?
rest of it.
Who's that person in the background? I recognise who they are. I was flicking through the IMDb just to find out who they are and what else they were in.
Yeah, and the biggest thing as well at film festivals for us is having a huge audience reaction. So when
Yeah.
you've got a packed house and something scary happens, there is nothing like that. You can't create that at home. It's a real kind of collective experience, and it's almost like you might watch these things at home and not be scared, you know, because you've got a nice setting and you're comfy and all the rest of it. But when you're in the dark with a load of strangers, it's almost like it's a completely different mood. So yeah. No, I think that's yeah, it's probably a good positive note to end on, and
Yeah.
maybe we should take some questions now and maybe chat about a few of the different subjects.